Hello, everyone. This is Keith Stone with the Center for Linux Studies here for another office hours with Greg and Janet and Aylen and Sarah. And this week we're talking about Hour 11, Greg, that you wrote for the participants. By the time you have read through the Odyssey, especially Odyssey 24, has your view of Achilles, as shaped in your reading of the Iliad, undergone a change in any significant way or ways?
And for some people it didn't, and I understand.
Yeah, Aylen, you were just saying something about
yes,
that.
there's an interesting question from one of the participants. It's, does Achilles regret his choice?
Yes.
Does he regret his chaos? So.
Yes, and I'm so eager to answer that because it shows how I almost want to say what a split personality Homeric poetry has if you look at the Iliad and the Odyssey together. Because I would say yes, in the Odyssey he does regret his choice. In the Iliad he would never regret his choice. You know, does that mean...
It's almost a relief when you get to the Odyssey and you see him thinking twice. You're like, oh, he does have the capability to reflect a little bit and
but
have some nuance.
Yeah, but how shall I say it? This is verbal art. So you can't expect a personality who is the same personality in both the Iliad and the Odyssey, even though he's meant to be the same person. And I'm getting myself into trouble the way I said that. To put it another way, I think if I step back, it's so important to me that the Iliad and the Odyssey are complementary. I really see them as complementary works of art. They not only were produced by the same artistic medium, but they're meant to be seen as the same, except, why don't we put it this way? I'll use the metaphor of a coin. It's two sides of the same coin. And the Iliad is concentrating on one set of realities in the cosmos as seen by the medium, and the Odyssey is concentrating on another set. The complementarity, I think, is organic, but that doesn't mean that Achilles is thinking the same thing in Odyssey 11 when he regrets being dead, and he says he would rather trade with the lowest form of a member of a society just to be alive again. He says that because he's in the Odyssey, and in the Odyssey it's a different world, different perspective. How's this? Different lenses.
Something you were saying, Greg, about complementarity reminded me that even though I said, I read the Iliad first and then I read the Odyssey, and I was so relieved when Achilles seemed to have changed between one and the other.
Yes.
Yes. The fact is that these epics coexist, and so that for the ancient Greeks, there's no like, let's read the Odyssey now in class and let's read next. Or sorry, the Iliad and the Odyssey. They just kind of, they're all together.
Yes.
So,
yes. Here's another thing. I don't know if it makes people feel better, but I think I could prove to you that the Iliad and the Odyssey evolved together. It's not just that they wound up being complementary. They were trying to be complementary, can I say it that way, for probably centuries. And the complementarity, which is very subtle in some ways and very blatant in other ways, is part of the big picture, which is Homeric poetry. And it's interesting that by the time we get to the 5th century BCE, Homer is simply the author of the Iliad plus Odyssey and nothing else. But if you go further back, he's the quote-unquote author of all sorts of other epics, which we only have in surviving in plot outline form. We call it the cycle. But the complementarity of the Iliad and the Odyssey and how they were both authored by Homer is simply taken to be a cultural fact of life by Greek-speaking people in the 5th century, which is pretty much when the Iliad and the Odyssey, as we have them, took their final shape. So there, Achilles is different at given moments because he is now seen through the lens. I'll make it singular. Seen through the lens of the Odyssey, as for example in Odyssey 11, whereas in Iliad 9, he's seen through the lens of the Iliad.
Well, I think one of our participants has been thinking about the fact that in Odyssey we meet Achilles, as it were, as a psyche. And does that, how much of that personality, as it were, is retained? And how, what evidence do we have maybe from the texts or even from the vase paintings, thinking back to those, about how much the psyche is the same as the personality or the person when they were alive?
Yes, well, what I love, Sarah, is how there are signatures that point to sameness. I'll give one example. When Odysseus has his interview with the spirit of Achilles in Odyssey 11, after the interview is over, Achilles recedes to the meadow of Asphodel. And then when you see his spirit again, this time he's communicating with other spirits who had their greatest moments in what we understand to be the Iliad. There too, the setting is the meadow of Asphodel, and I think of that as a kind of signature. Okay, this is an Achilles who is meant to be consistent in terms of where he is in the Odyssey, and where he is in the Odyssey is no longer on stage. He is kind of off stage. He is behaving like the spirit of a cult hero, not necessarily the spirit of the greatest warrior in the Iliad.
Mm-hmm. And we see the spirit, as it were, of Agamemnon as well. So there's another, as it were, character that we can look at and see what are the similarities, what are the differences, what is the lens that we're seeing that.
Yes. And there, I think it's very, very, very clear. I think all of us will agree that his character is quite consistent with his character already in Iliad 1. He is a bad leader. He has a character that is so defective when it comes to capacity to be a good father or a good husband or a good leader, that he just messes up from the beginning. and there he is, Odyssey 24, and he's finally figured out that he has messed up.
Mm-hmm. But and yet the beautiful words that describe the funeral of Achilles actually come from him, which is
yes, and wow, what a validation of Achilles is all the honor that Agamemnon took away from him in Iliad 1, because of which Achilles is so upset. All of that is really restored by Agamemnon himself in his own retrospective of what happened between Iliad 1 and Odyssey 24. Did I ever tell the four of you that when I started graduate school, I was such a hardcore linguist that my education in Greek literature wasn't very good, and so there I was being advised by Eric Havelock, who at that point, he was a very prominent Plato scholar, and Havelock asked me, well, what have you read in college? What kind of Greek texts? Have you read Homer? I said, no. Have you read tragedy? No. And so he put me into a kind of remedial reading course with the great John Finley, who was very dear to me as I went through graduate school. He was a great teacher. And in my reading course, one-on-one with John Finley, he said, oh, so you haven't read any Homer yet. Let's start with Odyssey 24. And that was my first experience with Homeric poetry. So I can't tell you how, not just intellectually, but emotionally, this is a coming together for me. And just thinking about my first impressions in the original Greek. It's really something. And to me, what I see in Achilles, what I see in Agamemnon, and what I see in Odysseus, it all comes together there. But imagine starting from there. It was wonderful.
Yeah. It's like the invitation
given
to use at what point are you going to start your narrative, and you can start anywhere and then go back around again. So.
Exactly. So
right.
It was a wonderful experience.
How does the saying go? Picking up from any particular point.
Yes.
You know, oh Muse, tell me the story of Achilles.
Yes, and what's also amazing, I think, about Odyssey 24, which is where it all comes full circle, I think, is that the characters are so self-aware of the plots. In other words, the story arcs that they have been in. I think people love to use the word arc of the narrative these days. Well, this is the end of the rainbow, so to speak. But what's the end of the rainbow? It's the beginning of the rainbow. So what a great moment. I'm always stunned into silence when I think of how it all comes together at the end. And so what I was fishing for in my question to our dear participants is really bifocal in the sense that in one way, maybe your opinion hasn't changed. And that might be because you got a pretty good idea of what was going on from the very beginning. And another thing you could say is if you started getting prejudiced against Achilles, and a lot of, especially young people, feel that way. You know, after they read Iliad 6, the goodbye scene between Andromache and Hector, how could they like Achilles anymore when Achilles is so responsible for the suffering of this very attractive couple? But and I know I sound like a broken record, but to me, if you understand that sorrow, then you should understand the sorrow of Achilles even better, and that's what Patroclus is all about. And in the end, there's Achilles with Patroclus, so everything's fine. Well, everything's fine. The sorrow can start all over again if you start the Iliad all over again.
I like how in 24, and I was trying to think of this earlier, well, we were stunned into silence, and now it's come back. They're so reflective on the medium in Odyssey 24, especially Agamemnon.
Yes, very
self-conscious. And he gets that Odysseus has.
I love that. And wouldn't you say, Keith, that at the beginning he's very non-reflective about the medium? It's as if he weren't aware that the camera is on. Watch out, Agamemnon! Look what you're doing. Look what you're saying. You're undermining your chance to be, I don't know, the superstar of the Trojan War story. He's not the superstar. and he's destined not to be, just by way of his actions and just the way he is.
And here we see Achilles' most human side. I'd rather be alive, right? That's what it's all about.
And I love that. And wouldn't you say, dear Janet, that even in Iliad 9, he's kind of saying that when he says, I have only one life to lose. And this is a hero who doesn't enjoy dying. What's the American popular expression? He dies hard. He doesn't want to die. He's not like embracing the death that is coming. He really loves to live. And so that's already in the Iliad. Then he has to die, but that doesn't mean he's going to enjoy it. So it's so different from the way I think some people think of Achilles as, oh, well, he's choosing death. He must really enjoy death. Well, no.
And in fact, the discussion has also touched on reflecting once again on the meaning of the name of Achilles.
The meaning of the name of Achilles, again, it's the way that wonderful French researcher Nicole Leroux said it. The name, the epithet, all these micro elements are like micro narratives of the big story. So every little ingredient is not only part of the big story, it is the big story. I think the one thing that I would feel very guilty about if we didn't talk about this is the status of Penelope as the key to the success of Odysseus in getting to be the superstar of his own epic. He couldn't have made it if Penelope hadn't been the person that she is. And that's made very clear, and that's certainly something that Agamemnon finally recognizes. He finally gets it, that, gee, if my wife had been like Penelope, I would be maybe in a better epic position. Maybe I would be the star of a story about how the Achaeans captured Troy. But that was all messed up. And isn't he, Agamemnon, already starting to mess up in Iliad 1? So what he's saying in Odyssey 24, oh, if my wife hadn't betrayed me, well, but look at that's true. That's what, and he says the truth in Odyssey 24. But think about Iliad 1. He's betraying his wife there by saying, I prefer this captive woman, Chryseis, to my wife. And he says it very crassly. It's very, very crude.
It's interesting. I haven't thought about how Odysseus's epic fame relies on Penelope in quite that way. Like, he can't earn it all himself. Or
no. It's really a 50-50 joint venture, and that's something that Agamemnon could never do.
Oh, Achilles seems to do it all by himself. His particular, and he doesn't need.
Well, but you know, dear Keith, even Achilles. And I believe Achilles, so to speak, in Iliad 9. I don't think he's just being rhetorical to say I've changed. I thought that Briseis was just somebody who is a sign of my prestige, and it's an externalized something. But by the time we get to 9, he says, you know, I've grown to love her as if she were my wife. I don't think that's rhetorical. I think if we had more Achilles stories, we'd say that he is a pretty good lover. There's been a book recently about Achilles as an ideal lover. Certainly in the song making of Sappho, I'm sure that he is the perfect lover. And I don't mean physical lover, I mean just somebody who's capable of loving. And we don't see too much of that in our version of the Iliad, but I think that's because it's presupposed. Unlucky us, I wish we had more about Achilles from ancient Greek song culture, but as we all know, we don't.
On that optimistic note, or reassuring note, I should say that we're out of time for this time. So thank you all again.
Yeah,
a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to the participants for whichever side of the debate they came out on. In a sense, both sides are right. You have to look at him differently, but in another way, you have to refocus on the Achilles you learn to know in the Iliad. So thank you all. What a lovely discussion.
Thanks.
Bye.
See you all next time.